Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're actually going to be talking about Ukraine. It's been a while since I've made a video talking about the Ukraine conflict and kind of discussing the events that are going on in Europe right now, but a pretty major news story just broke, and it's about time that we finally start talking about this again, man, because Ukraine is actually mounting a significant counteroffensive to the Russian invasion of their country. The West is monitoring it pretty heavily to see what exactly is in store, but this is going to be a significant point in the Ukraine conflict because for the first time, basically, Ukraine isn't really on the defensive. They're actually attacking, and they'll be fighting on offensive war, which is something they haven't done for the most part. If you've been following the Ukraine entire situation, you'll know after that Russia invaded them and everything, they've basically been trying to defend their major cities and prevent Russians from pushing further into the country, basically trying to prevent a full takeover of the country by Russian forces, and they've been pretty successful at this. This has actually been one of the major, I guess, headlines that we've seen from the war. You've heard a lot about how these defensive efforts for Ukraine have gone and how they've successfully prevented Russia from invading multiple places. One of the biggest stories, of course, was how Ukraine actually thwarted Russia's invasion of the capital of Kiev. Pretty important moment, obviously, being the capital city and whatnot, but Ukraine is finally going to have Russia on the run. After fighting multiple months basically defending themselves, Ukraine has decided that they basically want to take back some of the land that has been occupied and captured. One of these areas is going to be Crimea, which you may know because Russia basically annexed it back in like 2014, right? And it was a big news story, of course, when that happened, and people were worried that war was going to break out then. Nothing really happened too significant. I mean, there was some fighting and whatnot, but it definitely wasn't on the scale that we're seeing between Russia and Ukraine now. So it's time to basically see what Ukraine has in stock, what they can do to the Russians, and having them on the run, kind of having a different angle of this war now, what Ukraine can actually do. Now, keep in mind, a pretty big part of the Ukraine arsenal has been Western supplied weapons. You know, NATO, the United States, and these places have been supplying Ukraine with a lot of Western weaponry, which is some of the most advanced and lethal in the world. So, of course, this could play out a lot differently than a lot of people expect. Throughout this entire thing, Ukraine has pretty much been viewed as the underdog, and that's not the wrong answer because, I mean, Russia's military on paper, basically, is significantly larger than Ukraine's military. It was much better equipped at the beginning of the war, and it had more money, basically, to operate. So a lot of people, including myself, kind of saw this being a pretty easy Russian win right off the jump. Of course, that's not how it's happened. Russia has basically been stalled in their invasion efforts. They've been losing and bleeding out troops and, you know, their weaponry, their vehicles, everything en masse. I mean, they've suffered a significant portion of loss to their entire military, which is actually insane to say. Ukraine has inflicted a pretty high level of damage, but keep in mind that was on the defensive side of things. Now we're going to be seeing them go on the offensive here. So Ukrainian forces have begun shaping operations in southern Ukraine to prepare the battlefield for a significant Ukrainian counteroffensive, two senior U.S. officials briefed on the intelligence told CNN. Shaping operations are standard military practice prior to an offensive and involve striking weapons systems, command and control, ammunition depots, and other targets to prepare the battlefield for planned advances. The U.S. believes the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which has long been anticipated, will include a combination of air and ground operations. Ukraine indicated Monday morning that the actions were underway. Quote, "Yes, Ukrainian forces have started the offensive actions in several directions on the south front towards liberating the occupied territories." Natalia Humurinik, I think is how you say that, is spokesperson for Ukraine's Operation Command South, told CNN, adding, "All the details will be available after the operation is fulfilled." The plans come as Russia's war in Ukraine has passed its 6th-month mark, with U.S. assessments indicating that Russia has been able to deploy fewer units to the front lines than initially thought, according to a senior U.S. official. Now, this information is following what we've witnessed from the Russian military over these 6 or so months since the Ukraine conflict has started. The Russian military is actually terrible at communicating and operating its battlefield objectives. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't know what the issue is. I don't know if it's faulty leadership. I don't know if the communication's off, if their weaponry is actually too outdated, what the issue is, but one thing that has been consistent throughout Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that Russia has significantly failed its objectives. And honestly, the West and a lot of people significantly overestimated Russia's capabilities when it came to this invasion. I mean, we've seen the footage and we've seen the reports and everything. I mean, there's Ukrainian tractors that are literally towing Russian vehicles away from the war. Countless Russian troops have been killed. thousands of vehicles and weapons have been destroyed for the Russians. And not to say the Ukrainians haven't taken any losses, because of course they have. But Russia is definitely not at the standard they were supposed to be when this entire thing started. I feel like a lot of people, myself included once again, expected this to be pretty easy for Russia, because on paper they have one of the biggest, best militaries on the planet. But a massive fault that nobody really could have anticipated is just how poorly they actually execute their objectives. They seem to have a massive amount of confusion when they try to actually, deploy troops. There seems to be a lot of issues in their supplies. I mean, there's been reports of Russian vehicles running out of fuel and being abandoned on the side of Ukrainian streets. You've had straight up dozens of Russian soldiers just actually surrendering on the spot basically to civilians even. Like, it hasn't necessarily been a good time for Russia, and this counteroffensive is going to make it worse for them. The official said many of the existing units, which Russia organizes into battlefield tactical groups or BTGs, comprising infantry, tanks, artillery, and air defense, are deploying below strength, some at even half their normal manpower. The US has also been observing Ukrainian forces benefiting from the use of US and NATO supplied HIMARS mobile rocket launchers, which have allowed Ukraine to strike and destroy targets in Russian-held territory. CNN reported last week that US and European officials say Ukraine has successfully used a method of resistance warfare developed by US Special Operations Forces to fight back against Russia and bog down its vastly superior military. The resistance operating concept was developed in 2013 following Russia's war with Georgia a few years earlier, but its value was only realized after Russia's invasion of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014. It provides a blueprint for smaller nations to effectively resist and confront a larger neighbor that has invaded. Neither Ukrainian nor US officials are revealing the main targets of the expected counteroffensive. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces have been making advances around the key southern city of Kherson, which is currently occupied by Russian forces. Kherson is considered crucial to the control of Ukraine's southern coast and access to the Black Sea. Ukrainian and Russian forces have also been engaged in intense fighting in recent days around the nuclear plant, Europe's largest, in the city of Zaporizhzhia. Ukraine's nuclear operator Energoatom said Friday that the plant had been reconnected to Ukraine's electricity grid a day after the plant went offline for the first time in its history. So there's a lot of concern, of course, for what exactly is going to happen. Where is Ukraine going to start fighting? Where exactly are they targeting? Of course, they're not going to give the strategy up. They're not going to come to CNN and be like, oh, we're attacking here, there, and over there. Giving up your strategy, especially when you've been on the defensive the entire time and now is your chance to strike back, not a good idea. So it's very understandable that they're not really going to detail in plans like what exactly is going to happen. But what we do know from the intelligence that the West has been able to obtain, Ukraine is about to take the words fight back completely literally. Instead of fighting a completely defensive war where they just dig in and they just hold it out and hope that the Russians are finally going to leave them alone, Ukraine has shocked the world with its resilience. And it's actually been very inspiring, maybe one of the more inspirational stories of this year. The people of Ukraine are not fucking around. They do not care about Russia's goals. They do not care about Russia's objectives. They do not wish to be occupied in any way, shape, or form by the Russians. And the way Ukraine sees it, Crimea is still their territory, and the areas that Russia occupy are still their territories, and they're about to say fuck it and fight back. This is going to be a crucial turning point in the war, because obviously if Russia's losses start to become too staggering to the point where it's not really worth them staying there, could we potentially see Russia retreat or try to make peace with Ukraine? And also, can Ukraine successfully counterattack? Will the Russians finally get some sort of foothold in the country and hold back the Ukrainian forces? This really could be the turning point in the Ukraine conflict, because if Ukraine starts to push the Russians further away from the center of their country and they start taking back land, that's going to crush the already broken Russian war spirit. A lot of these soldiers didn't even know that they were going to Ukraine for a military operation. So they're already, bogged down by the losses that they've suffered. The war mentality for Russia isn't necessarily the best right now. This is something we've known for months. Realistically, the war morale wasn't that high to begin with. If Ukraine successfully counterattacks and starts really whipping Russia's ass in this way too, it could legitimately break them permanently, I feel like. Now, of course, I'm no war expert or anything, but I would imagine after you've been basically losing your objective for 6 months in a war you were supposed to win and didn't even know about, if you start getting pushed back, I can only imagine what that can do to your psyche, right? So we're gonna have to wait and see what the Ukrainians really have in stock. Also, we're gonna get a good, look into the effectiveness of these Western weapons in combat again. You gotta think, a pretty big part of the US military strategy has been containing the threats in Russia and China, so to see our weaponry on display, I guess, in the Ukrainian conflict, I think really gives us a good idea of how, the West could respond to potential threats too. So far, Western weaponry that has been sent into Ukraine and used by the Ukrainian resistance forces has been legitimately critical in defending the country's sovereignty and making sure the Russians don't make any more advances. In fact, it really does play a pretty large part into why Ukraine has probably been able to hold out as long as they have. Anyway, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubTheOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, talking about the Ukraine conflict and signing out.